The origin of the Spanish Tercios is in the Columna. The Spanish Tercios were a perfect combination of the different military units of the time, formed by veteran soldiers and commanders, most of the time, by good officers. In addition, they were not mere mercenaries for hire, they were men of honor, loyal to their king and united by a fervent Catholic faith. All this motivated the troops on the battlefield, which together with their victories created a great reputation throughout Europe. To put an approximate date to the official creation of the Tercios, it is necessary to go back in time until the XVI, when he took the reins of Spain. Carlos IV of Germany. Grandson of the Catholic monarchs, this monarch was presented with the difficult task of maintaining, with blood and fire, the territories he had inherited in Milan, Naples, and Sicily. With France pressing to snatch these regions from Charles I, the monarch had no choice but to reorganize the Spanish infantry that existed in these Italian regions. Thus, prepared for the defense, the first three tercios were born, the one from Naples, the one from Sicily, and the one from Lombardy. These pioneering units had since the honor of being known as Old Thirds, and each had a command ad hoc tactical groupings of different captaincies or infantry companies, whose entity ranged between 800 and 1,500 troops. Fernández de Córdoba, El Gran Capitán, transformed the colonnades into colonelais, each one made up of 12 companies of 500 men, of which 200 were pikemen, 200 rodeladores armed with sword and shield, and the remaining 100 were arcabuceros. This combination of weapons, which suffered alterations with the disappearance of the shield and the introduction of the musket, was the key to the success of the Thirds on the Swiss phalanges and the French heavy cavalry. The combat formation of the Third consisted of a battalion, or box of spades, flanked at its four corners by arcabuceros sleeves, the solidity in front of the cavalry of the block of spades perfectly permeated with the offensive power provided by the mouths of fire. The battles by Coca, Pavia, Mulberg, and San Quintin affirmed the effectiveness of said system. On the organizational and logistical level, the Spanish Thirds endorsed the transition from the feudal levies of the Middle Ages to modern armies, a process that had begun in the previous century. The Thirds were permanent units, with a well-defined organic structure and the medical, logistic and religious services necessary for its proper functioning. The Spanish armies of the period not only had, in their operations, field hospitals, but also established the first permanent military hospitals. The thoroughness with which the provision of troops was taken care of, on the other hand, becomes patent by means of the study of the transit of troops of Duchy of Milan to the Netherlands through a set of routes known like Spanish Way. The system of seats, or contracts, and the demands of wars, contributed decisively in the 16th and 17th centuries to the development of a true military fiscal state that established its mechanisms to finance their campaigns, without this being an obstacle for the entry on the scene of private military entrepreneurs such as the famous Genovese Ambrosio Spinola. The soldier of the Thirds was, above all, a professional soldier. Captain Marcos de Isaba recommended, in the treatise Cordesis of the Spanish Militia, 1594, that a soldier with less than 5 years of experience not be promoted, a period in which he added an additional sixth for the promotion to sergeant, 2 others to become a lieutenant, and 3 more before receiving the captain's patent. Such advice became a reality in the ordinances of 1632. In addition, unlike the German or Swiss Landsknecht, the Spanish soldier was not a mercenary who fought for money, but a subject of a monarch, known as the Catholic king, who from him he expected loyalty without conditions and an ethical spirit. Although the discipline of the Thirds out of the battlefield was lax and its trajectory was marked by a multitude of riots, it is no less true what, around 1590, an Italian diplomat, Giovanni Botero Benez, testified, Spanish soldiers suffer hunger and thirst with greater tolerance and effort than any other people in Europe, which has made them emerge victors infinite times. Outside their land they defend each other in close friendship, which is why their squads are almost invincible. The system of the Third became, for the aforementioned merits, the basis of the remaining armies of the period, and gave proof of its validity not only in the battlefields of Flanders and Italy, but also in other fronts of the Hispanic monarchy, places as diverse as the American continent and North Africa, the Indies and Barbary for the soldiers of the time, where conflicts such as the Iraq War and the fight against the Turks endowed the Spanish Tercios with particular nuances. These units were also the origin of the modern Spanish marine infantry, given that, both in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic, the Hispanic navies had their own tercios, that of galeras and the so-called tercios of the sea. The soldiers of the tercios were proud men and extremely careful of their personal honor, so much that they preferred death to dishonor and their reputation as soldiers. They were aggressive troops, disciplined and with enormous self-confidence, but difficult to handle in the deal if it was not done with care. For example, the Spaniards did not consent to be punished by beating them with their hands or a stick, as in other armies, since they considered him unworthy, and preferred to receive punishment with weapons such as the sword, despite the danger of it, considering it more noble. When fighting together with other nationalities or allies, it was common for Spaniards to demand, in order to defend their reputation, the most important, dangerous, or decisive positions in combat, as in fact they were employed. The Spanish soldiers were the troops who later rebelled for lack of pay, enduring years without charge and living in conditions of misery before rebelling. Instead of doing it before a major battle, as was common to press for their pay, they only did it after her, so that they would not say that they had not fulfilled their duty, but that it was their bosses who did not do it with theirs by not paying them. In case of mutiny, they chose their leaders and maintained a discipline equivalent to that of the army. Soldiers like that were excellent, but discipline had to be strong to control them. And in fact it could be very hard. One day in 1634, when they fought, together with the Catholic Alliance, against thousands of Protestant soldiers in the German city of Nordlingen. That day did not avail the title of invincible that carried the Swedish army, then, based on blood and courage, imposed the Hispanic morion. But in this battle not only could a fierce struggle for military supremacy be seen, but two different ways of waging war were also confronted, that of the Swedish army, revolutionary and novel, and the traditional but effective combat technique of the third-party experts. All the members of the Tercio used to carry a sword, type Espaden, style that is used in fencing, although with differences, and here it was seen who had more possible than others, since it was the soldiers themselves who paid for their weapons, to go with a weapon of better or worse quality. The weapons characteristic of a tercio were the pikes, the arquebus, and the musket. It can be established that the end of the tercios occurred at the Battle of Rocroi, marking a before a later. From that moment they entered into decadence, until finally they were dissolved in the Reform of 1704. One of the great warriors of history. Also the name lasts, being used in units of the regiment type of the Legion, as well as in marine infantry of Spain. The tercios are venerated by Spanish nationalist groups at present, which are always linked to the ideology of the extreme right and neo-Nazis in Spain, nostalgic for the greatness of a military unit, which contributed with its fierceness and courage to the military supremacy of the Spanish Empire at that time, the empire that never set the sun.